Yes, ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for joining us here for the UFC 288 preview show here on INC Live. My name is Karl and I'm joined by the man on the right-hand side of my screen. He is the scratch to my grounder. It's Joe Neal. Joe, thank you very much for joining us.
Glad to be here. Glad to be the Miz to your Johnny Mundo, John Morrison, I should say. I always want to call him Johnny Mundo.
Yeah, one of the more underrated wrestlers, I feel.
I think he's too good to be a boy, but he would be my number one bottom boy if he was. Like, I love Johnny Mundo. I enjoyed Johnny Impact. John Morrison was awesome. And he knocked out the Epic Meal Times guy, I guess, in like some boxing thing recently.
We have actually had people asking us on the main channel to cover some of these sort of like YouTube boxing events.
I mean, if they want to donate to the Patreon, I'll gladly do it.
Yes,
but,
yeah. I mean, somebody suggested that we do Lad versus Dumont. He actually was saying, I will pay money to do that.
Yeah, just for the Billy Gunn song, if we can get that copyright worked out, I would, for Dumont's walkout, like, I'm in.
We could sit here with all our hot dogging and grandstanding, but we are here to talk about UFC 288. And me and Joe were talking about this just before the show. Is this arguably the UFC's best event for the next 2 months? Because they've released the next batch of schedules. We're starting to see some fights filling out some of these fight nights and upcoming pay-per-views. And UFC does have a little bit of a lull when it comes to spring, but this feels a lot more extreme than I can remember.
My birthday's in June, and I hate how around my birthday, like, sometimes I just want to have a quiet weekend where I watch a good fights, and I don't think I'm gonna have that luxury in June. I typically don't. It's like, I just don't. The June pay-per-view is never good, historically, at least in my experiences. I'm sure someone can think of one good one, but I'm struggling to think of one.
I've got one off the top of my head, but I think we'll save that till the end of the show. I'm just looking here at some of the fights that the UFC have got as main events over the next sort of 4 or 5 weeks. So we've got Rosenstruik versus Jelton Almeida, which feels a lot like heavyweight privilege in my opinion. Plus, I think for all of his success, I think Jelton's quite one-dimensional, which is a bit of a bugbear that I have. You've got Aldana versus Rocky Pennington, which, as a Rocky fan, I love, but I know I'm very much in the minority. And then you were supposed to have Brendan Allen versus Jack Hermansson. Hermansson's obviously pulled out of that. And you're probably going to get someone like Imavov or Chris Curtis, someone of that sort of ilk, stepping in at short notice.
Is it Chow Magnalesh? No, is that his I'm thinking of?
Borralho?
Neck tattoo. Yeah, neck tattoo.
Jack Schmore.
Well, no, not him. Neck tattoo middleweight used to be a teacher, and looks like Paulo Costas went to college. I believe his first name is Chow.
I think it's Chow Borralho. He does look like the Schmo on steroids.
He does. Okay, that's what you were saying. Yeah, he does look like the Schmo on steroids, actually. The Schmo got a tan and got on the roids, got on a good cycle. I think I could see him clocking in there. That's who I'm kind of expecting. That card isn't great, though. I mean, Miesha Tate's on it, so I'll watch it for her. And then, of course, 289.
Which we'll obviously cover next month, but a lot of question marks about that main event. I think the undercard of 289's quite solid, but that main event's quite off-putting for a lot of people.
I love that co-main event. I wish that was 5 rounds.
Very good.
I wish that was 5 rounds, yeah.
Why do you think the UFC do scrimp so much when it comes to those sort of spring months? Do you think it's just purely saving up the big names for International Fight Week, or do you think there's other issues afoot?
I think it's them saving up for... I think, okay, so typically in a perfect world, your champions fight 3 times a year. That's unrealistic, I think, nowadays with like how competitive the sport is. So unless you're like they're your big names, if they're fighting other big names in competitive competition, you typically want a good time to relax, especially with all the studies and head injuries and stuff like that. You want to take time off to rest. So the UFC is hoping for at least like them to fight in the spring and them to fight later on in the year or like early January or something like that, and then fight like International Fight Week. So I think it's a lot of it is they want to save up names and not blow them on events that they just go okay, because I think they just take June as like, oh, this is our slow period in a sense, because then International Fight Week is always pretty good. August isn't always bad. September can be good, and then like
October,
November
November,
is,
December.
yeah, it just picks back up again. And then we have a little bit of a lull in like February. February used to be a big deal because they used to do Super Bowl weekend things, but then everyone kind of started doing crazy things on Super Bowl weekend, and I think they just avoid that weekend altogether now.
We can talk about this for the entirety of the show, but we are here to talk about UFC 288. So let's get some of the preamble out the way here. So this is the first event that's taken place in New Jersey since Colby Covington, remember him, taking on Robbie Lawler in 2019. It's our first numbered card in the States since UFC 169, headlined by...
169, that sounds so familiar. Oh, I don't remember.
Ironically enough, a bantamweight fight, Renan Barão versus Uriah Faber.
Oh, wait, the first one or the
The second one.
Oh, okay. See, that card isn't bad. The first one is horrific.
It's a bad card. I think it was number 2 when I did my worst UFC events of all time.
Oh man, it's I watched that. Thankfully I didn't pay for it. I went to a Buffalo Wild Wings with a friend of mine and watched it, and we left halfway through the like Hector Lombard Tim Bosch fight. We were like, I can't do this anymore.
So what's your overall opinion looking at UFC 288? Because for a long time, this felt like a card which was very close to falling apart. We have lost a lot of big fights. Obviously, the big one was Charles versus Benny, which ended up being rescheduled. But I think the UFC, especially when they got that co-main together on short notice, I think they've salvaged something which is... It's possible for a pay-per-view, in my opinion.
I think it's pretty good. It's really funny. I have this in my notes. I looked at Tapology, which has like a bout order, but I wasn't seeing like it's kind of hidden in a sense, like it's in the middle, but in like small text of when a fight is taking place for like their fight order. And so I was like, oh, this main card's pretty good, and there's even some good names on the prelims. And then I saw the bout order for the main card, and I went, oh no. uh, for one fight in particular that I was like, oh, I feel like one fight on the prelim should have been moved up. But no, I think this card's pretty good. It has like a lot of, at least on the main card, on the undercard, it has a lot of names that bring good action, even if they're not the best. And I value that. You know, like sometimes you can't just get all the best fighters, but you can make good matchups. And I think this one's pretty good. If it wasn't for the co-main being a last second one, I'd be like, oh, this one's a rough one. But no, this one's a really good one because the co-main definitely helping it out there.
You mentioned the prelims there. You can see those on our screen right now. We'll discuss some of the fights in a bit more detail here. And I think I've got an idea of which fight you think should be on the main card. It's going to be headlining the ESPN portion. Drew Dober, Matt Favola. This has potentially Fight Night written all over it.
It does for me. It sounds like just the biggest banger. It should have been the opening fight, I think, over what looks like the opening fight. This fight, Drew Dober is a wondrous delight, and I hope he has a job forever because he just shows up every time. And unless like you're just really actively trying to grapple him for like 3 rounds, as we saw like with Islam, but that fight was actually still not bad. He is wonderful, and he is the guy they will never let Paddy fight.
Yeah, I do not see that going well for Paddy if that fight happens.
Never happening.
Yeah.
And Matt Favola is also very fun.
A lot of fun for Matt Favola as well. There was a bit of a time when Matt Favola had a little bit of a hype train going. A lot of people got behind him, and I don't know if it was... I think it was what happened against McKinney. Like he got like spanked by McKinney in like something like 7 or 8 seconds. And I think since then the perception of him's always been sort of, you can put him on an undercard, he's going to get a fun fight out of you, but don't expect him to be breaking into the rankings.
I don't think he ever will. I hate saying that because he seems like a really nice guy on Twitter, Seems like a good fun dude. But I don't know if he ever will. I think more so him kind of being, funny enough, that Drew Dober esque, where Drew Dober I think could break into the rankings easily, if he isn't already ranked. But Matt Frivola seems like a little bit like a step below that, where like he won't be ranked, but he'll put on like some of the best fights consistently, or on any undercard for sure.
What he is basically is he's sort of a lightweight version of those. You know how we talk about the welterweight division, Action Alley.
Mhm.
You have people
Yeah,
like the Nico Prices, the Randy Browns of the world who just put on bangers against one another. Matt Voller is that for lightweight.
absolutely. Yeah, like lightweight's in a pretty in terms of entertainment, it's in a very good spot, and Matt Frivola is definitely helping out with that.
The other fight that caught my eye when it came to the prelims, and maybe it's my own personal bias because I consider myself a fan of her. I think the UFC have really done Marina Rodriguez hard done by here because he was a fighter who, in my opinion, come the back end of 2022, had done enough to earn a title fight strawweight. And
She
yet
should have got it.
they put her against Amanda Lemos, and all credit to Lemos, she ends up winning that fight. And here's Marina, her first fight back into action, and they're burying
Mhm.
her on the prelims.
I literally have it here. It was like how the mighty have fallen with Marina being on the undercard. It's so weird. She was headlining all the time. It felt like, and now she's on the undercard, and she should have got a title shot. She chose to not wait around for one, and they punished her for it. Okay, like I don't know how I feel about that,
And the thing is,
but
as well, is that it's not as if Lemos has sort of jumped at that opportunity and got her set up title fight. I think the
yeah,
UFC have been really stagnant with strawweight recently, and I've got a theory about that, which we'll discuss later on in the show. But a lot of people always make the argument that 115 is like the strongest women's division. The
mm,
UFC are doing their hardest to make it not.
yeah, it's like it's easily their strongest division, I think, and like 125 is finally pretty good now, but 115's been, the best women's division consistently for years and years and years. And I'm with you. It definitely seems like they're just trying not to make it so. Like, just awkward booking. Like, I'm not trying to blame them, but I think the Rose Carla 2 fight definitely made them kind of slow their roll on how they treat the division, which isn't fair, I think.
And it's a shame as well because I think Marina versus Werner could be very entertaining.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
Like, that fight's going to be pretty fun.
Because I've always been a belief, I think Werner is one of the most underrated female fighters on the roster.
She fights killers, you know? Like, yeah, she's like got a spotty record, but look who it's against though, you know? Like, that's kind of my thing with that. Her like strength of schedule is insane.
Yeah. And because what was she? She was something like 15-0 when she was in Invicta.
Yeah, she was insane in Invicta. I think she was unbeaten in Invicta as well. Um, sorry, I'm having trouble getting comfortable,
Yeah.
but try not to move around too much. But yeah, I think she was like unbeaten in Invicta and just was rattling them off. She had some a pretty good amount of hype coming into the UFC, and she's had a tough schedule. What can you do? It's
Yeah.
115 where everyone's really good. So 115 is
And
like bantamweight.
any other names on the prelims that take your interest?
Chaos Williams, I think he's underrated and he has some pretty good power. So it could be worth watching him take on Rolando Bodea. Kennedy, I always screw up his name. Kennedy Njukwu versus Devin Clark is a matchup at 205 that's going to have some sloppy power and some pretty good athleticism. So if you're into that, definitely think that one could be kind of fun. Devin Clark can be kind of boring sometimes, but he's very athletic. And Kennedy Njukwu is hits like a truck, has frustrating striking for me at least, but when he connects, he hurts people pretty bad.
UFC main eventer Kennedy Nchenziku.
Yes, he is. Yeah, got to put the respect on the name. I remember when he knocked out, I think it was his debut, but he knocked out Israel Adesanya's boy in like a comeback, and it was kind of awesome.
Carlos Ulberg.
Yeah, and he was tearing him up,
Yeah.
and then just kind of gassed, and then just crank Homer Simpsoned him. It was awesome.
I'm torn about that fight because I love Kennedy. I think he's that sort of you mentioned it before, that sort of wild, chaotic striker who can just out of nowhere get that knockout punch. But Devin Clark is so frustrating to me. I find him so dull.
He is, if you look at like his skill set and like and how athletic he is the most frustrating guy ever. He got choked out by a standing rear naked choke while shooting a single leg, and I that's happened to me too. But I will admit that has happened to me. As funny as that is, but still, it's like man, it just seems like the little mistakes here and there just add up, and it just frustrates me because I go, this guy could be good, and then sometimes he is incredibly boring, and it just frustrates me even more. I'm right there with you on that.
The name that takes my interest when it comes to the prelims. Now, this is a guy who I don't think many people would recognize unless you're a proper diehard. I would keep an eye out for, I hope I pronounce this right, Ikram Aliskerov. So 13-1. I think he came through on the Contender Series. The reason I bring him up is because I think you can both agree we're not fans of Chimaev. Like, I
No,
think we're quite
not a,
open in saying that we don't especially like the guy. But there's only been two fighters in his career who were able to scare Chimaev out of grappling. One was Gilbert Burns, and the other was this guy, Ikram Aliskerov. So he's going to be taking on Phil Hawes. I think it's the fourth fight on Fight Pass. And I'm not a big lover of the whole Dagestani sort of smash style, but this guy does have a lot of potential. I think Phil
for
Hawes
sure.
is in for a long night.
Phil Hawes also is pretty good too. He looked really good against Chris Curtis before the left hand connected. Like, that sounds mean, but no, like he actually has been improving his game pretty quickly with like good snap kicks. So that matchup is very fun.
Yeah. We'll go to the main card now, and we're starting off in the featherweight division. Now, we're talking about sort of blasts from the past here. Who saw this one coming? Kron Gracie is back in action for the first time since 2019. He's going to be taking on a fan favourite, Charles Jourdain. Betting odds for this one, you can get Jourdain at minus 190. Gracie comes in at plus 160. Now, to put this into context about how long it's been since Kron Gracie fought. So his last appearance was on, I think it was
Is
definitely
the
one of the
Cub
Florida
Swanson?
cards.
Yeah.
Joanna versus Michelle Waterson. This was
Mm-hmm.
James Vick's last fight in the UFC. He fought on the undercard against Nico Price. And to put this into context about how long ago this was, Brandon Moreno wasn't even in the UFC at this point.
That's wild.
Yeah. There have been a lot of, obviously, the world has been dealing with a lot of issues during that time, which may have played a part in his absence, but I think 3 years is a long time to come away, and yet out of nowhere, it's not like it's a local card. It's not as if, like Jourdain, you'd think Jourdain would want to be on the Canada card, which takes place next month. It's a strange one to include specifically on this card.
It doesn't fit like at all, really. It's so weird. It's really weird that the guy Charles Jourdain, who I actually like, he's on a 2-fight losing streak to Shane Burgos and Nathaniel Wood, both good fighters. And he's taking on a guy who hasn't fought in almost 4 years, and it's the main card opener. That's just such an odd statement to me. Like, it's very odd.
I mean, you could maybe make the argument that they sort of see Chrome Gracie as like a highly touted prospect, so they want to give him the main card showcase, similar to what they did with Raul Rosas. But like, Krone's 34 now, so he hasn't got much time left to really sort of make a run.
Not really. I mean, his style, if he's winning and he's, I hate saying this, fighting how he should be fighting, then it's a relatively low damage, low accumulative damage style. His shoulders and back are going to hate him. I can attest to that, but and I'm sure he very well knows that. But it's you don't take like a lot of like major damages and stuff like that if he's having his way. But he doesn't fight like that sometimes, so it's very just odd.
let's try and dissect some of the reasons why people are high on Kron Gracie. So we've got a credentialed jiu-jitsu practitioner, 2013 ADCC champion, the son of Rickson Gracie, who, depending on who you speak to, is arguably the most credentialed Gracie of them all. Like Rickson claims he won 400 fights in total, which I think might need verification. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
So he was 4-0 competing in Ryzen, won all of his fights in the distance, and
Mm.
he won his UFC debut up against Alex Caceres, which I think is a win which has aged very well.
It's a good feather in the cap for sure.
Because Caceres
Yeah.
has been fantastic since then.
Oh yeah, he's always been like really underrated, and that's a good win. Good debut fight for him, good test, and a very good win.
The big question when it comes to Kron Gracie, however, is what happens when he can't get the fight to the ground? And we kind of saw that when he took on Cub Swanson. Like, Cub, maybe a little bit long in the tooth at that point, but was still able to neutralize every attempt to get the fight to the ground. And what we got instead was an entertaining but still sloppy boxing match
Yeah,
where
it was.
Gracie was incredibly tough, don't get me wrong, but he was second best.
Yeah, dynamite chin is what I have written down. He took every shot, and he was taking bombs in that fight. That was my favorite fight to rewatch in the build-up because it was just like just astonishing. Because Cub Swanson, even nowadays, he still hits like a freight train. For his size, like he hits like a truck, and Kron Gracie just took it all. But yeah, he really didn't go for he didn't really try and take the fight to the ground very often in that fight,
And
which is shocking.
he got a lot of criticism from his family members for doing that as well.
But they're weird. Like, I'm, I so a little peel back of the curtain. My uncle, who was my jujitsu and martial arts coach throughout my life, he's worked with the Gracies on multiple occasions, and I have pictures and stuff. I've heard so many weird stories from them. Like, they seem very odd. I'll just say that. Snooty, I guess, would be the better word. But they don't like was it not Hodger? It was Hodger as well. But what was the Gracie that came in and got just destroyed by Joey Beltran, the Executioner?
Hollers.
And Hollis, yeah. Hollis came in and they were hyping him up because he refused to box. He refused to do anything but train jiu-jitsu, and that was it. They firmly believe if you're a Gracie, you don't need any other martial art. And I hate being this guy, but our sport has proved many times in just the name alone that that's not the case, and they're very stuck in their ways. So credit to Kron for training other arts, I will say, but that's not where his strong suit is.
Yeah. I have been reading going into this fight that he's been training with Cesar Gracie's team, so he's been doing a lot of work with the Diaz brothers and the Scrap Pack. So you'd think that sort of dirty, sort of grimy boxing style to try and... I think the way the Gracie's going to try and approach this fight is... The problem I find with a lot of jiu-jitsu practitioners, I sort of put Mackenzie Dern in the same sort of box, is that they are dynamite when they get a fight on the ground. The problem is they don't have the wrestling and the shooting game to get them there. It's something that Dern struggled with. It's something that I think Kron had issues with up against Swanson as well. It got to the stage where he was trying to pull guard out of desperation. I think the way he's going to try and approach this fight is to use the sort of dirty boxing to get into the clinch and then set up the trips and the throws.
Yeah. I think it's weird to me that, and it could be because wrestling is much more explosive. It relies a lot more on that burst of, quickness. But it's always weird to me that wrestlers just can pick up enough striking that it helps them so much in getting the fight their way, and just learning how to throw an overhand. It helps mask your double leg takedown or your level change in general. But in jiu-jitsu, it's always really odd to me that it seems so much harder, at least in my head, even me thinking about it, myself trying to do something. It's there really doesn't seem to be a lot of ways to get in there with the style. I don't know. It seems to me maybe like it's an explosivity thing. Um, but I think I can kind of see that as well. I think he has to kind of box his way in, maybe even kick a little bit. You know, I think kicking is like, I think the inside low kick specifically is always a really good move for grapplers looking to get in. I think that's always a really good approaching option. Um, but man, I'm still thinking about him training with like Cesar Gracie's team. Is he gonna, if he shows up slapping, if he shows up slapping and tossing up the birds, like, oh dude, I'm all in on this. But um, but it's gonna be interesting because he seemed pretty content to just kind of let it rip in the Cub Swanson fight. So
let's talk about Charles Jourdain here, because there is always two members to this dance. So coming into this fight off a 2-fight losing streak, his last loss came against Nathaniel Wood, which was on the Paris card. 4 wins and 5 losses so far in the UFC. 2 of his notable wins include Marcelo Rojo and Superboy Choi, which was the win that really put him on the map. Former TKO featherweight champion, which is one of the bigger MMA promotions in Canada. A guy who I think it's safe to say that he sort of boxed himself into the sort of entertaining prelim action fighter.
absolutely, he is a ball of energy and will just come out gunning, swinging, throwing like. I think it was like the Shane Burgos fight. He just like flying kneed into a clinch. I was like, oh, that's so cool. He's very cool. He's very fun. Very high energy and high action. But man, he struggles a little bit when trying to get taken down.
That's a concern for me as well.
Yeah.
I think there's both positives and negatives when it comes to Charles Jourdain. I think going forward, he's up there as one of the best sort of unranked featherweight fighters you can come across. Very good, explosive, flying knees, spinning kicks. But his big concern has always been going backwards. If you are somebody who can put pressure on him and get him backing up, his striking defense and his offense fall to bits. So I think we're going to see Kron Gracie trying to push him forward. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Kron maybe getting takedowns, pressing him up against the fence and using the trips. Because one of the things I saw when doing research for this fight, I watched Jourdain versus Nathaniel Wood. How many times did Nathaniel Wood take him down in the clinch with just tripping him?
Over and over and over again, just consistently.
And you're doing that against Gracie, who you know he's going to take the back if he gets the opportunity.
Absolutely, he's jumping up, backpacking instantly, and that's good night potentially. And another thing I thought about here is the Cesar Gracie thing again, because those guys love to be that pressure boxer. That's like in their boxing styling, that they both want to walk their opponent down. Hopefully they stand still, but that's the Diaz thing. And walk them down with punches and make it that dogfight. And that is a lot of putting the pressure on him and breaking him. That definitely could be a big aspect in the play here.
I'm going to be interested to see about the conditioning of both fighters. Firstly, it's a long time since Gracie fought. We know he has a tendency for quick finishes. While he was still willing to throw against Swanson into the second and third round, he was noticeably a lot tired. And you're going up against Charles Jourdain, who I think has good conditioning. And I think especially his counter-striking gets a lot better once he gets a read on his opponents and it gets later on. Like, he was piecing up Burgos in that third round. You could make an argument that was a 10-8. So,
I thought he was going to finish him.
So, I think we've got basically 2 results out here. Either Gracie's going to submit him in the first round, or Jourdain by decision.
Yeah. I agree with you there. And for me personally, it's really hard to pick a guy who's coming up on a near 4-year absence, And I understand in those 4 years, the world is a very different place than what it was 4 years ago. But at the same time, you gotta wonder, you know. I think there's too many question marks on Kron for me to reliably pick him. I have to go with Jourdain by decision here.
I'm going to go the other way. I'm picking
Okay.
Gracie to win this one. I just think there's too many weaknesses to Charles Jourdain going backwards, and especially dealing with the sort of trips and the takedowns. And now, don't get me wrong, it may have been something that his team have been working on during this sort of, 6 or 7 months since he last fought.
Yeah.
But I am going to be picking Gracie. I think the pressure that he's going to be putting on is just going to be a little bit too much for Jourdain. I can see him giving up the back. I'm going to say Gracie via naked choke.
He does spin a lot.
He does.
So, in one of my favorite fights this year, probably the fight of the year, I think we'd all agree.
I think I know which one you're going to be picking here, yeah.
Someone was punished by throwing a pointless spinning back kick while being pressured and backed up. I can't remember that fight, though. So...
You know how people always bring up to me, why do you keep bringing up Juliana Pena? That's sort of like, it's your version of that.
This is mine. Oh, man. The comments... One guy in particular who comments often was very respectful, and I told him how much I appreciate his respectful disagreements with me. Another one made that so much sweeter because he was not being cool at all, I thought. And I have never been happier for a fight since I think Conor got choked out by Nate Diaz. I think that was like the two highest highs I've had watching fights. At least it's up there for me. It was brilliant.
Fight number 2, we are staying in the featherweight division, and we've got 2 ranked fighters here. Now, originally, this was supposed to be Bryce Mitchell taking on Jonathan Pierce, which I was very intrigued by, because I think Jonathan Pierce is very underrated. The opportunity to get a ranking as well, up against Bryce Mitchell. Unfortunately, Pierce pulls out with injury, and it's Movsar Evloev who takes us up. So it's number 10 versus number 11. Evloev, a minus 260 favourite. You can get Mitchell at plus 220. So this is Bryce Mitchell's first fight since he had that match against Ilia Topuria, UFC 282, which is sort of hyped up as sort of like, who is the next future star of the featherweight division? 2 unbeaten guys, who's going to come out on top? Now, was that fight... I'll think of how to phrase this here. Was that fight Ilia Topuria being far better than what we expected? Or Bryce Mitchell not being as good as we expected?
I think it's the first one. I think Ilia Topuria is that guy right now. I think if you're fighting at 145, or sometimes he's at 155, I think if you see him pop up and you want to keep winning, I think you avoid him. I'm very high on Ilia Topuria because he demolished Bryce Mitchell, who I think is very good. And it was insane. Like that was really pumped for that fight, and I picked Topuria to win. I didn't think he would do it like that and that easily. It was shocking. I think Bryce Mitchell's very good. I think I don't know if he'll ever be top 5. I think we kind of see where his ceiling is, but like he could be like, he could break that mold, be top 5. He's such a good grappler. It's weird. It's very odd. Like, I'm not trying to be stereotypical because I'm from the South. It is so funny to me that like just a big old farm boy like him is a master tactician and technician on the ground. It is awesome. Like, normally you expect Arkansas fighter, farmhand boy, all that stuff. You expect the wrestler, the big brawling brute that's coming over with the big overhand right, who has this Dan Henderson in his prime chin. And instead we have Damian Maia with a left hand. It is hilarious to me.
And I think the worst part about that loss from Mitchell's perspective is, I think it's made people forget how good this guy actually is. Like, you're beating Charles Rosa, Andre Feely. He steamrolled Edson Barboza, who, as we saw against Billy Q, was still at the top of his game. So this is a very talented guy, and I think we get it a lot in this sport with recency bias, but I think there's a lot of people trying to write off Bryce Mitchell. Oh, he's a one-hit wonder and he doesn't know how to do anything other than grapple. No, he's talented.
Yeah, very much so. He has like I've never understand that. I think it's like what you said, recency bias. You said that in there. I'm with you on that. It just has to be recency bias.
So let's dissect some of the details of Bryce Mitchell's game here. Very grappling heavy. There have been some improvements to his striking. I know it's definitely a weak point of his game, but as we saw, he dropped Barboza, so there is some elements there. Even if it's one of those sort of situations where you kind of get this, where a fighter is so wary of the takedown, it sets up the power punch, sort of like Kevin Randleman, Crow Cop's the one that comes to mind there. I'm interested to see how good Bryce Mitchell is off his back, because a lot of his success that he's had grappling has been with him on top position. I would be interested to see how he could handle himself if he's the one being taken down, if he's able to sweep, reverse position, if he's able to throw submissions off his back. And I think this is a fight which is going to possibly, depending on how it plays out, I think this is a fight which could answer a lot of those questions, because Evloev does like to grapple himself.
He's got good hands as well, but he can do both. So I think I don't see I can see Evloev just going, nah, I'll take him down. Why not? And I think we're definitely going to get an answer there. I would imagine it's really good off his back, or at least pretty good off his back, based on like how he grapples and how he kind of approaches it. I would imagine it's at least, I wouldn't say as scary as it is when he's on top of you. Like that, he's a whole other animal when he's on top. But I would imagine he's pretty good. I'd be shocked if he wasn't good off his back. I mean, people might say the Topuria fight, but in fairness, Topuria had hit him with what are basically cinder blocks for hands for about 10 minutes at that point. So, it's one of those things. He's really scrappy when he's on top, like in scrambles. So I wonder if like that's like his just go-to thing is just to force a scramble from underneath as often as possible and trying to force maybe to get a mistake and maybe even get a reverse position. I that's kind of where my brain is thinking when like watching him grapple. But I'm really wondering what's going to happen if Evloev says I'm not wrestling today.
That's a concern I have as well.
Yeah.
Because with Evloev, we'll get into him in a little bit more detail here. So he's coming into this fight, and he's actually 16-0 in the not in the UFC, but over his entire career. I think it's 5 wins in a row in the UFC itself. His last win came against Danny Ige, which is that sort of stepping stone win that you need in the featherweight division. Not a lot of fanfare about Evloev, though, going into this fight. And you'd think, 16-0 fighter, unbeaten, why isn't he getting sort of like the big fanfare that, in a way, that someone like Topuria is? And I can think of 2 reasons. Number one, he's not a finisher. All of his fights have gone the distance so far in the UFC. And secondly, is there a little bit of a case of, oh God, not another Russian wrestler?
I think it's both, actually. That's I was wondering, like, why is no one talking about this guy? Because in my notes I go, another undefeated prospect with good striking and wrestling for Mitchell to take on. It's like, it seems a little unfair to toss him 2 in a row like this. But like, why isn't he getting talked back to Poirier? I think it's definitely the fact that you see, if you haven't watched him fight, you go, oh, a Russian getting decisions. I don't want to see a Russian wrestler. Whereas like the Dan Ige fight was like primarily like a scrap, like a good boxing match. And the other thing is, he is not a finisher. He was a finisher like in K1, and nothing against competition in K1 or not K1, M1. It's just not the UFC. So if you're not finishing guys in the UFC, it's like Alexa Grasso, champion of. So I'm done. I'm done. That was my last joke. It's like Alexa Grasso. She had like 4 wins like before Invicta, like that were all like under 30 seconds or less, and then she gets to Invicta and the UFC doesn't get a finish except for like the last 2, and no one thinks of her as having like that kind of power, like finishing ability. Um, and I kind of wonder if that's like kind of how it is with Evloev. Like he clearly can put guys away. He has KOs on his record, but he just isn't known for it. It's like I'm trying to think of a guy from like back in the day. My brain is saying Jeremy Horn wasn't known for KOing people, but he had finishes, so he could put you out realistically.
Do you think that, and I'm sort of bringing this up on a wider point here, like you'll get these guys who'll win every fight in the first round, get into the UFC, that sort of thing. Is that people fighting weaker competition who maybe don't have the durability or the skill set of people in the UFC? Or do you think it's fighters knowing I can't risk going gung-ho in the way I would on the regional scene? Do you think it's a mindset thing, or do you think it's just genuinely that the quality of competition is...
That's a really good question, actually. I'm gonna take a coward's way out here and say it's a case by case thing. I think there are people like Alexa Grasso once again, who has always had, like a boxing kind of style, and she's always fought that way. She's always, how she's fought, from like I'd imagine her debut fight in MMA to now, outside of getting better and being fighting smarter and maybe more technical, it's relatively been the same with like pressure boxing and combinations and like switching stances. I think a lot of it is like, excuse me, when you're getting finishes, a lot of fighters maybe are like kind of coming in with their chin up because it's not the best competition. So I think you could argue that way. But in the case of Evloev, who I haven't seen his fights outside of the UFC, you could definitely say, like, if he's fighting completely differently, fighting a little bit more passively, he's not fully, sitting down on his punches as he would outside of the UFC, I think you can definitely make that case. That's like a pretty interesting case study, though, of like seeing these guys who just finishing machines. UFC, it's like 5 straight, decisions. It's the greatest ever, Georges St-Pierre. He openly fought more conservatively once he reached the top of the sport. Like if you look at him pre Matt Serra finish, he was a finishing machine. Choked everybody out or knocked you out unconscious. Unless you're Mayhem Miller walking up in a Hannibal Lecter mask, he's finishing you. And he, like, then Matt Serra KO'd him. He's like, why am I fighting this way? I'm the best wrestler in this division. I'm the best striker in this division. I'm going to do what I need to do to win. So it could be a case of like that. Like, that was a style drastically changing.
I think there's a couple of X factors going into this fight, which I feel is going to determine the result. I think that if you're looking for the better all-rounder, Evloev his striking is just leaps ahead of Bryce Mitchell. So I could easily see a situation where Evloev says, I'm not going to risk any battle on the ground against this guy. I'm just very happy to sit behind a jab and piece him off for 15 minutes, which I think is a way that it could very realistic. I'm struggling with words here. It's doing this early in the morning. Yeah, we're recording this on the Saturday morning. There's a couple of scheduling conflicts, so we decided to record this early on the Saturday morning. So Evloev could very easily sit behind his jab, piece Bryce Mitchell up for 15 minutes, which personally, I think that's where it's going to go. However, we have seen at times Evloev does have a tendency to try and sort of prove himself. He'll say, hey, you know what? I am going to strike with this kickboxer to prove how good I am. And we saw that when he fought Hakeem Dawodu. Like, he dominated those first 2 rounds with his wrestling and thought, I'm going to stand and trade with him in the 3rd round, and he very nearly got finished. Is there part of Evloev that could possibly say, I want to prove how good I am. I'm going to wrestle this jiu-jitsu artist?
I could see it. Like I don't think he'll thinking more so. I think it's him going, I'm fine on the ground. Like I can, because like you brought up earlier, what's he going to do off his back? Like I think that's a very common mindset for wrestlers whenever they see these jiu-jitsu guys who have like Bryce Mitchell's more of like an American jiu-jitsu, which is like from what it seems like, always to me, it always seems like these guys like just want to have like crazy top position and just dominate from there, like your Jake Shields and whatnot. And I think you'll probably see that and just go, I'll take him down. What's he going to do off his back? I could definitely see him doing that. I think one other X factor I have here is Bryce Mitchell openly talked about retiring after the Topuria fight. I want to know where his head's at. Because what if he has a lot of self-doubt? What if he's like, nah, I'm not going to retire. Why am I doing this accent? It's too easy for me. It was too easy for me. I told myself I wouldn't do it. But what if he's thinking like, I just don't want to, like, I'm fighting because I have to. Like, this is what I got. That's never a good reason to fight, I think, is feeling like you have to. It's the second you make something a job and it's no longer your hobby or your fun thing, it's the love's gone. And like, what if that's the case? I don't know where his head's at. Maybe he wants to make another rap album. I don't know.
Wasn't there a flyweight fighter who had something similar? Like, he walked away from the sport and then came back like 2-3 years later.
He's on the undercard on this fight.
Jimmy Flick?
No, it was. I was thinking of Zalgat.
Oh, Zalgas, because he got a lot of split decisions that went against him, didn't he?
Yeah, and then he got like finished by Manel Cape, and he was like, "I'm done." And then he came back and lost, and then he's like fighting on this card. Fun fact about him: he's openly polyamorous, has multiple wives. Yeah, guy's just keeping all the women for himself. Yeah, like, and it's, I want to know where his head's at. That's like why I almost don't want to make a call on it, but I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna make the call with the idea that he's in here, he's ready to go, he's looking to fight, and I think he can bully his way into a decision or submission win. Bryce Mitchell.
I think this is going to be a lot more competitive than the bookmakers say.
Mm-hmm.
Because even though Ilia Topuria did look amazing against Bryce Mitchell, Bryce did have success. He managed to get Topuria down at the end of that first round, which a lot of people forget.
He even hurt him on the feet once with one shot. Like, he caught Topuria stepping in and landed a good left hand.
And that's another factor as well. I think that one of the big things that Topuria had in that fight was he had the power. And Bryce Mitchell was spooked into going forward because he was scared of that counter shot coming back and cracking him. But you're going up against a guy in Evloev who doesn't have that same power. So is Bryce Mitchell going to be a lot more willing to go forward than he wasn't willing to do last time out?
I think that's going to be a part of it as well. Like, who hits like Topuria at featherweight? No, I think he's got like cinder blocks for hands, it feels like, which is how hard he hits. And so I think definitely that was it. And if you look at like Edson Barboza as well, Barboza openly struggles when pressured. So I think, like, Barboza, he'll still throw while being pressured. And Bryce Mitchell didn't care. He just kind of kept going. So definitely shows you the difference in power between like Topuria and like other featherweights who known for their power, like Barboza. So I wonder if like he's going to feel it and go, I don't care about this. I can just tough it out,
Fight
Get that good old Arkansas boy on him.
Fight number 3, and it's a fight that Zalgas will be very interested in. It's a women's strawweight bout. Jessica Andrade is taking on Yan Xiaonan. Betting odds for this one, Andrade minus 190. Yan comes in at plus 160. So Jessica Andrade is back at strawweight after her flyweight run. She went 3-2 in the promotion, got herself a title fight in the process. On the whole, do you consider Andrade at 125 to be a success or a failure?
So it was the Aaron Blanchfield and obviously Valentina, right?
It was Chukasian. She beat Chukasian.
Yeah.
Then there was Valentina, where she lost. And then Calvillo, Lauren Murphy, and Blanchfield.
Yeah, that's a success, I think. Um, it so you didn't beat the number two. I that you didn't beat the then champion. So what? She beat everybody for the most part, Valentina, and I struggled there. I want to apologize. I struggled there. I said I wasn't going to do another joke, and I held it in. I held it in. I'm proud. Also, we mentioned we're doing this in the early morning. I apologize if you're getting ASMR Joe. It is 5 a.m. for me.
A lot of people like ASMR Joe, actually.
I think for April Fools, if I'm gonna do like an ASMR video, like with the whole microphone setup, and just be like, and that's another round. The low kick, like do all this stupid stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, you didn't beat Valentina. A lot of people can say that. And Aaron Blanchfield looks like the future. So, you know, I don't see too much shame in those losses. I obviously think she was better at 115, but cutting weight sucks. And I've never had to do it, and I never want to do it in my life. So I understand her trepidation in going back to 115. But as long as she's not bouncing divisions, I'm cool wherever she wants to go.
Yeah, that was something that bothered me as well, because she had that fight with Lemos, which a lot of people were sort of framing as a potential title eliminator. And then straight afterwards, she chooses to go back to 125 for the Calvillo fight. And it's something we sort of touched on earlier on in the show. I think that strawweight in these sort of recent months has really suffered at the hands of the UFC, because it's almost as if the company don't know what to do with this weight class. It's like we often talk about like sort of the five queens era, where you had all of these five former champions facing one another, and a good portion of those fights were classics. But now Joanna's retired, Rose is AWOL, Karl is pregnant, and all of a sudden you're like, well, who's next? It should be Lemos, but for whatever reason the UFC aren't going down that direction. And I've kind of got a bit of a theory as to why. I'm going to put this to you. This is a lot of 2 + 2 = 5, so if I'm talking BS, I apologize.
I like 1984. I'm ready for this.
I think the UFC always had the plan to do Whaley versus Andrade 2, especially after Andrade ran through Lauren Murphy. But Andrade took the Blanchfield fight, lost that, and the UFC can't give a fighter coming off a loss a title shot in a higher weight class. So this fight is just a way for Andrade to stay busy, get a win under a belt, and then they're going to do Whaley versus Andrade sort of July or August.
Absolutely. I think that's definitely what they're going to do. I have it in my notes. Expect Andrade to get a title shot off this win. I don't know what they're doing at 125 or 115.
And the thing is, it's not as if Lemos is a boring fighter. She can crack.
Yeah.
And she's 36 as well, so time's running out.
Yeah. What sucks about her beating Marina Rodriguez too, I brought this up in the recap, and we've talked about this, like in like messages and stuff like that, is like she beat Marina Rodriguez, but I'm sure a lot of people think this. You good?
I'm still alive, don't worry.
Sneezing? Yeah. But I never feel bad about sneezing. I case in point, I am the worst at it. I think it was like two preview shows ago I was sick. But yeah, I'm sure a lot of people think this, but the Lemos thing is Andrade kind of ran through her and choked her out with a standing arm triangle choke. And Lemos, it was so tight, Lemos couldn't even get a chance to fight out of it and just tapped. And I think that kind of taints the idea of her getting a title shot. And even though she probably should, beating Marina Rodriguez is a huge feather in the cap, who they've already ruined by not getting a title shot, like, when she deserved it. I agree with you on this, because I'm sitting here going, what are they thinking? If Andrade doesn't get a title shot off of this, I'm officially putting my name forward to replace whoever the matchmaker is. Wish me luck.
Like, I did a bit of research. If you take away the five queens, so like the five former champions, the last person outside of those five to get a title shot in this weight class was Carolina 2016.
Yeah, against Joanna, which I covered that fight.
It's a good fight.
Yeah, it was actually a lot better than I remembered it being.
Like, I remember we had people over, because obviously it was like the big New York card and you had three title fights. Connor was there. And when Carolina cracked Joanna in that fourth round, the place lit up.
Oh yeah. I think I was out. I had just turned 21 or 22 around that time, so I was out drinking and watching that fight, and I remember everyone knocking their beers over and like freaking out for that fight. And that and the Wonder Boy Tyron Woodley 1 fight, we were freaking out over.
Let's get to the X's and O's about both of these fighters, so, and we'll start with Jessica Andrade. It's hard to believe she's, what, 29, 30 years old? 34 fights under her record. She has the most wins of any female in the UFC, the only female to win fights in 3 different weight classes. And here's some of the people she's beaten: Murphy, Lemos, Chukagian, Namajunas, Tisha Torres, Gadelia, Larissa Pacheco, who now fights as a featherweight in the PFL, and Raquel Pennington.
Crazy. And Rosie Sexton as well.
Yes, which I think was her UFC debut.
No, it was against Liz Carmouche, because I remember.
Oh, yes. She took the Carmouche fight on short notice, and then I think she fought Sexton like shortly after.
Yeah, and both those fights are crazy. The Carmouche fight is nuts, because Carmouche is just throwing her to the ground and beating her up, and then suddenly Andrade gets up, clearly undersized, and cracks her. And it's like, oh, it's kind of crazy. And then the Rosie Sexton one is crazy, but not in a great way, because Andrade never stops hitting her, and that fight should have been called off. Like, it's pretty rough.
I've actually teased the idea of doing a video on Andrade's bantamweight run. Like, maybe if she does get a title fight, I'll do it in the build-up towards that, because it's a great story, even if it's not the most publicized. Like, here is this greatly overmatched fighter physically, and was still able to be like a top 10 feared bantamweight.
She was terrifying. Like, she was like, you would see her like at like weigh-ins and like fighters, because she's, definitely like way too small for the weight class, looking down because she's so short, and then she goes in there and throws them or punches them or flings them across, like, and then chokes them out. It's the weird. It was nuts. It was like, it was haunting. It was awesome.
What do you feel are the big strengths for Andrade? Because we've seen plenty of big, brawling clinch fighters. But what separates her from someone like a Ilia Latifi, for example?
She is probably the pound for pound queen of power in women's MMA. Another thing too is her aggression is unbelievable. Like, whenever she smells blood, she just runs at you and just throwing Vanderlei Silva. I always want to call her Vanderlei Silva, because that's who she reminds me of. She fights just like prime Vanderlei in Pride, like with the throws, the suplexes, and then just these crazy wild hooks. Everybody always says Cyborg, and that's an even more accurate comparison. But Andrade is like almost a queen of violence sometimes. She just blitzes you, and she sits down on all her punches. She's very quick. Like, Rose is a faster fighter. And in their second fight, she is piecing up Andrade. Then Andrade hits her once, and you can just see like the life force drain from Rose, and it makes it a fight. Like, Rose is dominating, then suddenly she gets hit. Now it's a fight. It was wild. Great fight, by the way, if anyone hasn't seen it. And she is strong, like very, very strong. She's like a little tank in there, and she's a competent grappler, not very good off her back at all. When she gets taken down, she's kind of lost. But on top, she's just big old mean, pure strength. And if she gets a hold of a neck, those short arms are putting you to sleep. Just an aggressive finisher.
And I think her cardio holds up as well. Because I remember the Joanna fight, and Joanna spends like 25 minutes piecing her up, and she was still coming forward, still trying to press the pace.
Just relentless, like, and never gave up. Like, a lot of heart, in her. Never give up kind of thing.
There have been two types of fighter over the years that have beaten Andrade. Fighters with fantastic movement, or fighters who can take her down and neutralize her on the ground. Does Yan Xiaonan fit into either of those brackets?
Kind of the moving around. She has kind of a basic kickboxing style. She will throw out kicks. Her boxing isn't great, I think. It's fine. Very passable, I feel like. Then we'll randomly spin. It's just kind of how it is, She does have decent footwork. It's fine. I think she can kind of play that cat and mouse game effectively. I just don't know for how long is kind of the thing. It kind of feels like when you fight Andrade, I think they should be a soundtrack of the Jaws theme, the conductor there, like just playing on loop until she gets in. And I I wonder how long she could be on her bicycle, as they say, and getting on her bike, just moving around. I don't think this is the best matchup for her. I think I definitely agree with your idea, with your theory. I'm definitely in that camp too. I will put on the tinfoil hat with that in a heartbeat. I don't think she just kind of feels competent everywhere. She's had success in the UFC. I'm not saying she's a bad fighter. She's pretty successful. And I just don't know if she has the skill set required to beat her.
Yeah. It's not as if Yan is a bad fighter either, because...
No, she's very good.
Yeah. Her two losses, Carla Esparza and Marina Rodriguez. And the Marina fight was a lot closer than people remember. I remember a lot of people saying that Yan has a claim to winning that one.
Yeah, it's close. I remember picking Marina. I remember agreeing with Marina winning, but I definitely thought Yan made it quite closer than was expected, because at the time Marina was running through everybody.
I do have concerns over Yan's ability on the ground, because the big sort of loss that you bring up is Carla Esparza. Now, I want to make it clear, Carla is a much better technical grappler than what Andrade is. But once Carla got Yan down, Yan had no answer. So I think that's a big concern if Andrade is able to get the takedowns. But Andrade is more sort of a clinch-based takedown. She doesn't really shoot for double legs in the way that Carla does, so I think that's maybe a wrinkle. What this fight could be to me is, do you remember the fight that Andrade had with Tisha Torres?
Yeah, remember that one.
Which it's an underrated fight, by the way, but like Tisha is on her bicycle pretty much the entirety of that fight. Like, Andrade would charge in and Tisha would get these 1-2 shots, but then eventually the pressure would just wear off and Andrade was able to get the takedowns and get the decision. But Tisha kept that a lot more competitive than people thought. It's just, Tisha just doesn't have the power to keep Andrade off her. That's the sort of fight I can see playing out here. I can see Yan maybe early on in the fight staying on the bicycle, getting a few quick shots here and there, but eventually Andrade is going to get her hands on her and take her down.
Jaws team, I kind of think of this fight being a mix of that. Another fight, I thought you were going to bring this one up, is the Joanne Wood fight, where Joanne Wood tried to get on the bike, and that's a much more extreme version of that, where Joanne Wood got on the bike, then suddenly she just gets thrown down whenever Andrade finally closed the distance and threw her down. I think she choked her out, pretty quickly, because Joanne Wood, we're fans of her here on the show, but kind of has a similar, deer in the headlights when it comes to the grappling as well, especially on her back.
Do you think that Andrade's activity could be a bit of a detriment to her? Like, this is her third fight in 4 months.
It's awesome as a fan. For her, it's a detriment, I think. I think, obviously the Blanchfield thing was like a 1 week notice fight against someone who is probably the future of her division. Not the best call, I think, but she's a company woman. They're gonna give her as much love as they can for even taking that fight. Case in point here. But at the same time, I wonder. We talk about this often. You brought it up. She's not even 30. She's like 28, 29. She's like my age. But fight years are a much different thing. Like Jose Aldo was like 36, 37 when he retired. My brother, uh, was, whenever he was texting me as he's watching the Merab Dashvali fight, and he goes, "I thought Aldo was 48." And I was like, he's 80 in fight years and still chugging. It's like Shogun. Shogun was only like, 39, I think, at one, like a couple years ago. And we saw him fight, I think it was like in 2020 against Paul Craig. And we went, I thought he was like 48. Like, fight years are a big thing.
And then you got people like Barrow, Rory McDonald, like washed out the sport
dude,
by 32, 33.
Yeah, that Robbie Lawler, and he's another example of like the flip side of it. No one is like Robbie Lawler, who had a career resurgence in some of the most damaging fights and kept going after he's like 32, 33. But that Robbie Lawler 2 fight just ruined that career of Roy McDonald. Like, just too much damage. Andrade hasn't been in a war like that. I mean, the closest one is probably the Claudia Gadelha fight, which is probably the best women's fight. That's probably the best women's fight of all time. I have a fight I think I like more, and it's not what you think. Hold on. But that's probably the number one women's fight of all time, I think, is that fight.
Even better than Joanna Whaley.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's the only fight I can think of I like more is Jessica Penne Watterson in Invicta 9?
Invicta 5, I think.
Oh man, even earlier. Yeah, that's my favorite women's fight of all time. Check it out if you haven't seen it. But that's probably the best. It's like my favorite movie of all time is In Bruges. But what's the best movie ever? In Bruges. But number 2 is probably No Country for Old Men. Kind of thing. It's kind of how I view it. Yeah. Andrade, though, a lot of fight years on her. I wonder how this is going to, like, if she keeps fighting like this, if she keeps staying active, let's say she has a 4th fight and, like, maybe she jumps on the 289 card or something crazy like that. You're going to have questions about longevity,
You've got me thinking, honestly, how would Andrade fare against Juliana Pena? Let's say Nunes pulls out of that fight and they do an interim title, Andrade versus Pena.
I think Pena's Wine Mom boxing could give her troubles, but I think that Jaws theme would eventually play. Actually, Pena just take her down. Never mind. Yeah, Pena just take her down.
All this talk about Jaws, it makes me think Yan Xiaonan's best path to victory is to get Roy Schneider to throw a block of dynamite into Andrade's mouth.
It's the only way, if she doesn't say, smile, you son of, like, it's, it's over. It's the only chance. God, I love that movie. Now I want to watch that movie.
Hey, what? INC Live, watch long, we'll watch Jaws.
Excellent. And then I talked about In Bruges enough on the show. I will watch that anytime with anyone.
Core main event time now. We are going to get back to MMA, and we're going to the welterweight division. And kudos to the UFC. Kudos to both fighters for taking this one. Bilal Muhammad takes on Gilbert Burns. Gilbert Burns, minus 105 favourite. You can get Bilal at plus 125. And we mentioned in last month about how welterweight had a reputation of being a bit of a diva weight class. A lot of the top big names unwilling to sort of take a chance and, go for, try and put their sort of status as a contender on the line. Kudos to both of these guys for doing it, because Bilal had a strong claim to a title fight. Gilbert, of course, just fought very recently against Jorge Masvidal. Do any of these guys have the chance of beating Colby Covington to the next Leon Edwards fight?
No, because the UFC is stubborn and their matchmaking sucks. Sadly, they should. Colby Covington does not deserve a title shot at all. Gilbert Burns and Belal Muhammad, one of them does. I think Belal maybe. I think strength of schedule is like the only thing you could argue, but the Leon fight is interesting, so you could play off on that. Gilbert Burns, in terms of strength of schedule, probably deserves it. I know you're going to hate this, but I don't think his stock. I think, I don't think you'll hate this part, but I don't think his stock dropped at all from the Chimaev fight. That fight was just so good. But that dude ain't here. That dude could make a claim off of that win, I thought. And that dude can't make weight. So
I've heard some stories regarding Chimaev, actually. Now, this is just hearsay. This is just rumor and innuendo, so don't sort of like Dave Meltzer me about this one, Eric Bischoff. I have heard two theories about Chimaev's inactivity. Number one is because of the Kadyrov links, he can't get a visa into the US. And the other rumor I've heard, he popped after the Kevin Holland fight. He's serving a USADA suspension.
There's only one way to find out. We check underneath that cage. That's what John Jones did. Maybe he hit under there too.
True.
Yeah. That's so great. That's the fact that story's true by multiple accounts. It's haunting. But I do think, I think the Chimaev pop and haunt. I heard that too this week, and I hope not. I don't like him as a person, but I like watching him fight, and I kind of want to keep watching him fight.
I like watching the second round of the Gilbert fight.
Oh, when he nearly gets soccer kicked, it's awesome. That's like, if he would have soccer kicked them, it would have ended both of their careers. But would it have been worth it for like that brief moment of like looking back into pride? Yeah. But this fight's great, and Gilbert Burns is the guy we talked about. We talked about him, being one of the anti-divas. He's the Page of this division.
Gilbert here.
Oh, is that Soraya Burns? And it's but he's like the anti-diva. He doesn't care about who he's fighting. He just wants to fight. That's why they gave him Neil Magny, because no one else at the top of the sport or top of his division wanted to fight. So he was like, I'll fight anybody, I don't care. Neil Magny? Sure, I haven't fought him before. And then he finally talked Masvidal into fighting him. He fought him, he fought Wonder Boy, he's kind of been looking amazing, and definitely really happy, because Belal Muhammad looked pretty content to just sit on his merits for a while and just wait for a title fight. Like, when was the last time he fought? It was the Wonder Boy fight.
Sean Brady. Kuwaiti.
Oh, he did fight Sean Brady. Okay. Yeah, that is fair. I always think it's the Wonder Boy fight last. Belal Muhammad getting a finish, and it's not memorable. Wild to me. But and now he's here to fight too. Good. Like, this is what this division needs. We got to stop being divas, and we got to stop letting Colby Covington just walk into stuff.
Why do you think the UFC have been so reluctant to give Belal the title fight? Because I think I understand if you have two fighters who have an equal claim to a title match, you go for the bigger talker. That's always been the way the UFC have operated. But when it gets to the stage when you've got a guy who is sort of 8 or 9 wins in a row, you've got to bite the bullet and reward meritocracy, in my personal opinion. And like, Bilal's done that for me. It's not like, I don't think Ankalaev is an exciting fighter, but his winning streak reached the stage where you had to give him a title match. And Belal, for me, is in the same boat, especially after the Brady fight, because Brady was an unbeaten prospect who the UFC were quite high on. and he steamrolled him.
Yeah, he ran through him pretty good. I mean, Brady had the good fight against Chiesa. I think there's two reasons. One of them is probably true, and it's funny. The second, I think, is maybe just my own personal belief. I doubt the UFC looks at it this way. Case in point is they're giving Colby Covington a shot. And so that second one is his strength of schedule. I think they're going Wonder Boy, sure. Sean Brady, sure. Who else? Damian Maia, who retired. Wonder Boy, is much older. Sean Brady, relatively unproven. The Chiesa fight, I think, does prove him that he's good. But was he actually going to get a title shot off of beating Belal Muhammad? I don't think so. So why should Belal get one from beating him? Is kind of the idea. That's, like I said, though, that could be my own beliefs because I don't know if he necessarily deserves one off meritocracy. That's a good winning streak. I want to see him fight someone at the top more, and that's kind of a problem of welterweight. Is none of these guys want to fight each other except Gilbert Burns. And the other one is that I think is kind of funny. I would be really funny to me if this is exactly what the UFC thinks, and I think it is. I think they just go, he's boring. Oh, he also beat Vicente Luque I hated that fight, but I'm a Luque fan, so. Yeah, I think they just think he's boring. I think that's it. He isn't a good talker. In fact, he's kind of cringy. And even though he seems like a nice guy, I think that's it. And here's Colby Covington, who, funny enough, is also a wrestler that can be very boring, but he also can be very exciting, and he's a talker. It's kind of like when Conor beat Dennis Seaver, and poor Dennis Seaver, and Frankie Edgar was lurking around, But I think it definitely feels like they just want to give Colby, a good one. It's really weird.
It's such a shame as well. And it's something we'll get into when we talk about the main event as well. Some of the UFC's recent matchmaking regarding title fights. With Belal, though, what would you say are the biggest strengths when it comes to Belal? Because the one thing that really stands out in my head, maybe to his detriment as well, Belal is a very intelligent fighter. He knows how to game plan so well for his opponents. He's fighting as
super smart.
He's fighting an acclaimed kickboxer. It's struggling with my words again. He's fighting an acclaimed kickboxer in Wonderboy. He takes him down. He knows how to neutralize Luque. He knows Brady has some issues with his striking. He makes it a stand-up fight. I think he's very intelligent and knowing what he needs to do to get the best of his opponents.
Against Damian Maia, he was like, well, he could match me on the feet because Damian Maia had decent hands, but he knows Damian's just going to shoot on him constantly. He's like, I can't take him down or else I'm giving him what he wants. So I'm just going to reverse him and hold him against the cage and just stop him from having any offense. And my offense will be clinch control. And that fight sucks, but he game planned it perfectly. He's a very smart fighter. And I feel like I'm saying his fight sucks too much. I'm going to stop that because I'm not trying to rag on Belal because I have nothing against the guy. I'm very much pro win however you want. It's a sport. It's not, sports are entertaining, but that's not their primary thing. I'm much more interested in who the best is.
Yeah.
Case in point, GSP. And yeah, Belal he's got pretty good cardio too. He doesn't ever stop. I was hoping he would gas out against Luque. He didn't. And he didn't do much. He just kind of held him. But that's also he was shooting for takedowns constantly. He was always working in the clinch, trying to get him back to the floor if Luque did stand back up. And just he's really smart. He knows when to use his energy. He knows when to conserve it. But I don't know if he ever has is going to ever be in that position where, he's out of gas. He's kind of just got really good cardio. His hands are decent. Sean Brady has no boxing. So Belal did pick him apart. But I wouldn't expect him in this fight necessarily to be the better striker. he'll be fine for a brief moment or so in the striking if he really has to, but he's not like a Leon Edwards where it's kind of like, oh, you're, not a lot of knockouts, but you are a very good striker. Here it's like, he's passable in the striking for sure. He's above average, I would say. But his wrestling is very good. Very good grindy wrestler, good at sticking his nose out. And he's tough. He can take a shot. He's taken some good shots. I mean, obviously Luque put him out, but Luque puts most people out. He's taken some good shots, and he took a head kick from Leon Edwards and just, like, laughed it off. Like, he's very tough.
Who do you think the short notice is going to help? Because on one hand, you could say, well, Gilbert Burns just fought recently, so he's not going to be as fresh as what Bilal has, who's had like a 4 or 5 month gap between his last 2 fights. But at the same time, this fight was booked, 2 weeks notice, and Bilal is a big welterweight. He's going to have to cut a lot of weight in a short space of time.
I think it helps Burns. I think for like a 2-pronged reason. One, he's huge, like you said. And 2, we've kind of touched on this before, is that's less time to game plan. And at this stage in the game, against a guy like this, Gilbert Burns is kind of a puzzle. So it's really easy for me to go, how do you beat Gilbert Burns? You jab him, you move away from his right hand, and you punish his entries, and you take away his kicks. That sounds pretty simple on paper, but fights aren't on paper. You have to actually think of how to do these certain things, or if you're trying to, wrestle him. He has been bullied by wrestlers in the past, kind of. He's very scary on the ground. And if you're not like willing to go to the ground with him because of how high his jiu-jitsu accolades are, how do you deal with that? You have to now game plan around how he likes to grapple and look at all his footage. And in 2 weeks' time, while cutting weight, sounds like a nightmare. To the point where I think if I was Bilal, I'd be like, yeah, I'll take that fight on a full camp. It's kind of wild.
I'm going to be interested to see what sort of game plan Bilal does take against Gilbert Burns, because I think when it comes to a striking battle, I think in terms of technique, they're probably even in terms of how good their striking is, but Gilbert carries a lot more power. So Bilal choosing to make this a stand-up fight, that's pretty risky. And if he tries to take him down, we know how good Gilbert is off his back, so that's a risk as well. I wonder if it might be the strategy, and I would hate to say this in terms of entertainment. I wonder if he goes down the Holly Holm route. Sort of wall and stall, stay against the fence. Gilbert's not going to be able to do anything. Like, he can't get a grappling game going if his back's pressed up against the fence. So it wouldn't be good for the UFC. It wouldn't be good for Bilal's chances of jumping Colby. But it's a very realistic avenue for him to win this fight.
Absolutely. That is actually what I have down. I was like, please say Holly Holm. So that is the INC here. We are updating Webster's dictionary. You're adding that verb. Yeah, I that's the only thing I can think of for like the safe route for Bilal. Like with Bilal, I think if you want to, nothing against this. I think you think of what the safe route to victory is for, and that's probably what Bilal's going to think. I can only really think of Bilal Muhammad or Holly homing him. Oh no, but I can only think of Holly homing him or Gilbert Burns, and I don't know if he can though. Like, I'm kind of curious to see how that happens. I think a lot of this is the short notice of it, because he also has to get inside, and that means you have to go through the danger zone of uppercuts, left hooks, overhands, and that sounds like a nightmare to just kind of navigate that.
So let's assume the UFC do listen to fan reaction and say, you know what, we made a mistake giving Colby this title fight. And let's say the winner of this one does go up against Leon. What do you think would be the better fight for Leon Edwards? Because on one hand, like, him and Bilal, have sort of unfinished business because of the way the first fight ended. Gilbert Burns, fresh opponent, stylistically a more intriguing matchup for Leon. Which way do you think, in your personal opinion, would be more interesting?
I think it's easier to promote the Belail fight. But I think in terms of like, I think an easier fight for him is Belail as well. I think that's just a pretty good matchup for him. I mean, he showed how easy he can, defend all the takedowns in the world from Belail. Underrated wrestler, as we saw in his last fight with Usman. He stuffed a lot of takedowns. But I also I think in terms of building him up as like, a very good champion and kind of adding to his legacy, I think you almost want Burns to win because Burns is kind of the boogeyman of the division, and beating the boogeyman has to just be the big feather in your cap. You beat the guy that was champion forever, that people were saying he was better than George. Now you can fight the boogeyman, So I think in terms of that aspect, you root for Burns as Leon. But I think in terms of like what's an easier fight, I think you root for Belail.
Which way are you going to go with this one?
I think Burns. I think power's the big equalizer here, and I think having to navigate that minefield of uppercuts, punches, just everything, it sounds nightmarish. But I would not be shocked if we get a 3-round Holly Holm fight snuck in.
Oh, it's going to be 5 rounds.
It is. Is it 5 rounds?
I think it's a 5-rounder.
On 2 weeks' notice, what were they thinking?
They must be paid a truckload for this.
Yeah, they're getting. I wonder who asked for that. I bet Belail did. He's got really good cardio. I'm sure he did. He's also, like, pretty confident, which I get when you're that hot right now. I still think I pick Burns, even if it's 5 rounds. I think that's a lot of power. I think it's another Jaws team potentially.
Yeah, I'm going to pick Gilbert to win this one as well, but I wouldn't be surprised if Belal does get it done. And I hope if Belal was to win, it's finally the win that makes people realize, hey, we clown this guy, but he has got something about him.
Absolutely. What I hope for is win or lose. I hope Belal gets some respect on his name because he doesn't have any. I feel bad for the guy, Just because you're boring doesn't mean you shouldn't get any respect. Like, I felt that way about John Fitch back in the day, too. And I think, but I also, the big thing I hope is the winner of this fight gets a title shot over Colby Covington. Please, UFC.
100% agree. 100% agree.
Horrific. Yeah. Horrific booking. I thought I thought the merger hasn't started yet. I thought that was Vince coming back.
No, if it was Vince, he'd be having Chris Barnett dancing.
Actually, yes. And then suddenly, here comes Conor McGregor with the Money in the Bank, cashing in on Leon Edwards.
Don't give them ideas.
They're gonna do it.
Main event time, and we're going to the Bantamweight division here. It's the champion Aljamain Sterling taking on the former champion Triple C Henry Cejudo. Betting odds for this one, basically a pick'em. Aljamain Sterling minus 105, Henry Cejudo a slight favourite minus 115, but extremely close between the two. So, let's picture the scene. It's May 2020. UFC 249 takes place in Jacksonville, no crowd whatsoever. Henry Cejudo has just beaten Dominic Cruz in the second round. He retains his bantamweight title, and he decides, you know what, I've accomplished everything, I'm walking away. Here we are 3 years later. What do you think has coaxed Henry Cejudo back into action?
Money. That. And I wonder if like he isn't satisfied with it. Like a lot of times, you walk away from something and you go, I'm satisfied. And then like a day later you go, I messed up. I almost said something else. Um, and I wonder if that's it. I wonder as that time moved on, he was like, did I do it? Did I do it? Because I mean, when he left, he was out. He was openly talking about how he felt like he was the greatest ever, and no one was on his side really, outside of his coach with the glasses inside. And like, I wonder if that irks him. And he's like, no, I know I'm the greatest. I'm gonna go prove it. Who's the top guy right now? I'm gonna walk in and beat him. I wonder if that's it as well. I mean, because I personally think if he wins this fight, he's a GOAT contender. I don't think he beats George for me, but I definitely think he's 2 for 3 if he wins.
Do you think there's an element of... I'm trying to think of how to phrase this here. I was very interested to see how the UFC reacted to Cejudo retiring, because if you remember when Khabib hung up the gloves, they spent a good few months before they actually accepted him vacated. They were just basically,
Yeah.
well, no, Khabib might be coming back. We're talking with him. And there was that big thing in January where he was saying, the big announcement from Dana White regarding Khabib's future, all that sort of stuff. Yet with Cejudo, it was basically, okay, you're gone, get lost. And he immediately booked Jan versus Aldo.
Yeah. Very weird. Very, very weird. I thought that was. But I think Habib beating up Connor made him a megastar, and Cejudo never was that megastar.
No.
Sadly, he should be, because if anything, you could argue. I mean, I think already Cejudo is much higher on the GOAT totem pole than Habib was. Cejudo beat Mighty Mouse, kind of, but he technically on the record he has a W over Mighty Mouse. Like, I don't know. It's super weird.
Another thing I want to talk about with regards to this fight is a trend I've been seeing with the UFC recently, where we sort of touched on it when we talked about Colby seemingly getting the Leon Edwards fight. The UFC are dismissing meritocracy and activity a lot more than they used to. Like, I've got a list here of some of the fighters who have either had title fights or are rumoured to be getting title fights later on in this run. So, John Jones, never fought at heavyweight, first fight in 3 years, gets a title fight. And here are some of the fights which are rumoured. Stipe, coming off a loss, hadn't fought in 2 years. Henry Cejudo, hadn't fought in 3 years. Juliana Pena, coming off a one-sided loss, still gets a title fight. Colby Covington, hadn't fought in 2 years, 2-2 in his past 4. Why are we seeing the UFC dismissing merit more than they ever have done?
I think to them it's like in their mind they just want to hit that big box office goal. I don't know, but I wonder if their bottom line is starting to be affected. It's because they don't promote. Like, we
No.
talk about this often. They're the worst. Like, they're a promotion, but they're the worst promoters ever. Kind of. Like, poor Scott Coker talks about his fighters all the time, saying that they're on the level of the UFC guys. Poor dude. They're not. But like, the UFC, why aren't they building up like any of these guys? There's so many guys. If you put any ounce of like effort into promoting, just a little bit, you have stars, like mega stars. Like, Brandon Moreno had a little bit of a push because he's Mexican, but Alexa Grasso hasn't gotten any. Yair Rodriguez will probably see a push, but Volkanovski really hasn't gotten much. Max Holloway, I think, has gotten more of a push than Volkanovski has, personally. Islam got a huge push because of the Habib connection, but that's kind of it. Usman, they were pushing really hard, but fans weren't taking to him. It really felt like. They push Style Bender and fans take to him somewhat, but where's they just don't promote anybody unless like you open your mouth and brag or like talk trash, because that's the easiest to do. They don't want to put any effort in. It seems like they're willing to promote the guy that's going to do all the hard work for them,
Yeah.
and it's abysmal, you
And
know. And then they wonder why fans hate it when guys who have earned a title shot off meritocracy don't get one.
And I don't think their recruitment is as good as it used to be either. Like, don't get me wrong, the UFC are still getting very talented fighters coming through. But if you compare that to someone like Bellator, like, over the past 3 years, you can sort of count on your finger the amount of sort of true megastars that the UFC have had. But Bellator, like, in the past 3 years, Hachi Mix, Amazov, Nemkov, Usman Nurmagomedov, very talented fighters. Maybe not the flashiest, biggest talkers, but they're backing it up in the cage. It's sort of the UFC in some ways is sort of going through their new generation era, where sort of like they're just a little bit complacent. Like the bigger stars are leaving, the newer stars coming in maybe don't have that same sort of pizzazz and sort of it factor.
Mm-hmm.
So like,
and then here comes John Jones with the one glove diesel in it.
yeah, it's
Just,
I think the UFC are lucky that they don't have a true viable contender in the same way that WCW was to WWE.
they need one.
They
I
need
think.
one.
Yeah, if the rumored PFL Bellator merger happens, then there you go. You know, there's one. There was a promotion. I don't think it's ever happening. I remember hearing about it where fighters were going to get paid right and they were going to actively hunt down a lot of these like contracts. And I forgot who was backing it.
I think we're talking the WFL. Tempted to think
Was
that was the
that
name
it?
of
Is
it.
that what they named it? I don't remember even hearing a name. But I remember hearing that they were going to like actually pay fighters and they were going to actively go after people like aggressively get talent, as well as like having their own like developmental league as well. And I'm like, that's a good idea, and I like this. This isn't going to work because the UFC has such a big market share already that they're going to just bully you out so they can keep treating fighters like crap. um, but they need a number two. They need a guy, someone who is on their footing, their equal. And I really hope that Bellator PFL one helps, like, kind of bridge that gap.
So let's talk about this fight in a little bit more detail here. We'll start with Aljamain Sterling, our champion. 22-3 record. Now his last fight was a win over TJ Dillashaw, which was a bizarre matchup, which happened in UFC 280. But it did add to Aljo's growing portfolio, which includes Piotr Jan, Corey Sandhagen, Pedro Munoz, Jimmy Rivera, Cody Stamen, and Henan Barao. Yes, Barao was a little bit past his prime then, but it's still a good name to have on the repertoire, as it were. Also interesting to note, so this is taking place in New Jersey, which is the home state of Suri Longo, and it's Aljo's first ever headliner, either as a pay-per-view or as a main card. So Norma Dumont got a UFC main event before Aljo did.
Cause I'm a nice man.
Bah, bah.
That's wild. I did not know this is his first one. That's awesome. Good for him. He deserves it.
It does, like
He's very
hometown
good.
fighter as well, fighting in New Jersey. So that's going to be a good kudos to him.
Gonna be a great pop, you know. I'm excited for him.
Yep.
Yeah, he's really good. he is very good. He pisses people off because of what happened in the first Jan fight, and that isn't fair. We should not be that does not take away from how amazing he is. I openly thought Jan was going to run through him in their second fight, and I will never forget me and my best friend looking at each other going, yeah, that's right. He's actually insanely good at fighting. And because I stand by, I thought he definitely won the second Jan fight. And then he smoked on TJ. But that's a weird one, you know. I think that fight was going to happen the same way regardless, for the record. And then maybe not a finish, but I thought he was going to bully him like that regardless.
But I kind of feel all of these asterisks, which against Aljo's title defenses, I feel like the fan base still don't appreciate how good Aljo is because of that. Because Piotr Jan, first fight, obviously ended the way it did. He was losing that fight and then Jan got himself disqualified. The second fight, there are people out there that think that Jan did enough to win that. TJ Dillashaw was fighting with basically one arm. And you can almost guarantee if he wins this one, people are going to be saying, well, Henry Cejudo hadn't fought in 3 years. So I feel like he's in a bit of a lose-lose situation.
Yeah, and luckily, he seems like he doesn't care. Seems like he's very much in this heel mindset of, I don't care what you think of me. I know I'm the man.
I think it used to bother him, but I think he's gotten over that now when he's sort of playing to it.
Yeah, I think he's doing pretty good about it. He's a good heel, you know. And I think he's really fun. I think he's a really fun all-action fighter. He's like a grappler primarily, but he is like nonstop, you know, goes to 11, spinal tap, you know, like he is always just going at him, you know, constant pressure. He's not the best striker. He's a little sloppy, but he breaks people because he's tough. He's very tough. He just kind of breaks you.
And I think
the second your hands go up to block all these crazy punches, he takes you down. And then if your hands are low, he's kicking at you. He's spinning, back fisting you. He's throwing crazy hooks. It's just a constant grinder he puts you through.
He makes up for his lack of technique by output. It might not be the best jab, but he's going to be throwing it 1, 2, 3, 4 times in a row. He's going to be throwing teep kicks all the time. It's a very high output style.
His teep kicks are good, actually. Teep kicks are very good, I think. And he throws them constantly, which I love.
I do remember the Pedro Munoz fight. I thought that was a fantastic striking performance.
Oh, yeah. It's on 238. Fantastic card.
Yep. I wonder why you're bringing that up.
Weird.
Yeah.
Cejudo's 4 80-pound heads on that card, too.
It's a good point, actually. 238, both of them on the same card as well.
Yeah, it's funny, you know.
It's interesting that we bring up the sort of disclaimers regarding Aljo's recent wins, because you can very easily make the argument of Henry Cejudo, because
Absolutely.
Let's go back to the second Mighty Mouse fight. We're both in the same boat. We think Mighty Mouse won that fight.
Yeah.
Then you've got TJ Dillashaw, who had no place fighting at flyweight, plus the headbutt.
He headbutted him too. Yeah.
Marlon Moraes, credit where it's due. That was a good win. Maybe it hasn't aged all that well given what happened to Marlon afterwards. And then you got Dominic Cruz, who was inactive for 3 years and coming off a loss.
Yeah.
So I think some of the criticisms you can make of Aljo and his title defenses also apply to Henry Cejudo.
I think so too. I think that's why, like, that's why whenever he was talking about how he's the greatest ever, because he was saying, like, I think he still says it, I'm the greatest combat sports athlete ever. And it's like, well, with the Olympics, you have a point, but you're wrong still, I think, because it's really hard to give him the full credit. In terms of pure talent, he is unbelievable, but I don't think he was ever flyweight champion personally, because I thought DJ beat him, and that Dominic Cruz fight shouldn't have happened. And I love that card. I genuinely have a very special place in my heart for that card. And I don't know. I don't think that fight should have happened. It was weird matchmaking once again by the UFC. Can't make any new stars.
What's been interesting for me when looking back at Cejudo's sort of portfolio is he hasn't really changed all that much as a fighter from when he made his UFC debut to when he retired against Cruz. I think his striking style is a little bit more karate based, whereas before it was very sort of orthodox. But it's very much that sort of alpha male approach of using the threat of the takedown to set up the big striking and the power punches. And
Mm.
the strange thing is, I feel like Cejudo's grappling has always been more of a prop. It's something to fall back on just in case you need it. On the whole, he's largely been a striker in his UFC run.
Yeah. It's like a break open in case I'm in trouble
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Like, there was the Mighty
Like,
Mouse second
so,
fight. That was the only real time I felt he properly utilized his wrestling as a means to win.
yeah. And that's like, you know, I mean, because no one at the time was out striking Mighty Mouse. But I mean, like, yeah, he's been striking. Like his Wilson Hayes fight, great performance from him. Is he just batters that open side? Something I preach about all the time, kicking the open side. He just lights him up with kicks to the open side, forcing something to happen because he knows Wilson Hayes is expecting to take down. He's expecting to take down. He's just getting kicked. His ribs are probably broken. And so when he finally oversteps to make something happen, here comes the right hand. And a lot of that is the karate style, but it's a lot of it too is the threat of the takedown. Is just he's just sitting there waiting and turtling up, waiting for this takedown, and just eats all these shots. I mean, Cejudo's had like a, you know, he's really good for kind of being plain Jane. He's also, like, you talked about this with Belal Muhammad. He is super smart, very smart. He knew if he was attacking the legs against Dominic Cruz, and he knew to knee. He was like, I got to knee him when he's ducking. Like I got to catch him with a knee or a kick when he's ducking, and he did. You know, really smart game plan there. And I thought Cruz looked really good in that fight, even. But you know, game plan works. And against Marias, not necessarily the best game plan, but he broke him.
Yes.
Like I think the reason the downfall happened is that fight. Honestly, like I think that fight just kind of broke him.
And we're seeing this intelligence as well when we look at Cejudo obviously working as a coach. I think he was working with John Jones for the Cyril Gane fight. I think he's got a couple of Weili, who's been fantastic. Really, like the leaps and bounds on Weili's grappling since the first Rose fight, plentiful. So, and he's doing the breakdown videos as well. So his mind is very clued up on this sport. So even though there are question marks about Cejudo's ring rust, I think his intelligence is going to make up for it. He seems to be in good shape as well, from what I've seen. So I don't think he's been sitting around eating chocolate or anything like that. It's part of the reason why I personally lean towards Cejudo for this fight. Plus, also as well, I think stylistically, he's going to be a nightmare for Aljo.
I think he's a good one. I wonder this. I don't think I've heard people say Aljo has a durability issue. I think that's just Aljo hate.
Yeah.
Marlon Moraes was KOing everybody back in that period when he got lit up by him. Sure. You know, I wonder though, a lot of Aljo's game is moving forward. And this is not me joking. It's going to sound like I'm making a Cejudo joke here. I'm not. But a lot of Aljo's game is moving forward. And Cejudo is the best headbutter in combat sports history, probably. He is. Like, so he does, and so Jack Slack affectionately calls the cheeky nodder, where Cejudo does this in almost every fight. Like, he'll duck his head, and he'll either change levels as you're stepping in on him, or, you know, like if Cejudo is pressuring you and then you try and like counter and you have to move in for it, he ducks his head. And that's essentially the wrecking ball Miley Cyrus was riding in on, like coming at you full force, and that you're moving into also horrifying. And Aljo level changes a lot too in his pressuring attacks when he's stepping in. I legitimately wonder. I have it written on my notes. Is this fight going to be a DQ because Aljo KOs himself on that cinder block? Like I legitimately wonder that. Like,
All
are they
Felder's
finally
screaming in the
catch him?
commentary box.
Yeah, like, I mean, that being said, John Jones for years was able to get away with doing this. Can Cejudo get another title win by swinging the world's biggest cabeza at Aljamain Sterling? I don't know. Um, I think this is a weird matchup. I think it's a really weird matchup because I don't think Cejudo is the best counter striker outside of that head. I think he's much better when he's the one leading the dance. And that's what I'm really curious about. Who is going to be the one to lead this dance? I think whoever leads the dance wins this fight. And I wonder if Aljamain Sterling is going to be the one to do it. It's really hard to be. I almost don't want to pick. I almost don't want to pick because this fight feels as like a pick 'em in terms of matchmaking. But I think I'm going to pick Aljo for the same reason I picked Charles Jourdain. Even though Cejudo has been very active as a coach, he's one of those active coaches. It doesn't feel right picking him here because of the layoff. I think if there was no layoff, I'd pick Cejudo to win. But I will say, Cejudo, if he wins, he's probably number 2 or 3 all time. Right then and there.
I'm going to be picking Cejudo for this one. I think that stylistically, I think he's a tough matchup for Aljo because a lot of Aljo's offense comes from the scrambles, the grappling exchanges. Not so much the first takedown, but just persisting, going for 2 or 3, and then taking the back. That's how he beat Piotr Jan. Is he going to dare do that against an Olympic gold medalist? I'm not too sure. I don't think so. And if that happens, you're going to have to rely on Aljo's striking, which it's high output, but I don't think it's not the most technical. And it also tires Aljo. Aljo, we saw that when he fought Piotr Jan the first time around. And yes, I don't think Aljo was 100%, but he was forced into a striking match, and Piotr Jan was piecing him up by the 4th round.
Yeah. I have here in my notes, Aljo is the better grappler, while Cejudo is the better striker and the better wrestler. But it doesn't, like, I think Aljo's even said this, he can go 1 for 21 as long as he gets that one. And I think that is interesting to me. What happens if Aljo is on top? It's going to be hard, but that's why he's shooting 21 times. But if he does get on top, is it like a Sandhagen moment? You know, I think is probably the number 2 guy in the division. Besides, maybe Merab and Sandhagen are probably like fighting over that. But he got Sandhagen down and just put him unconscious really quick. And Sandhagen's a good grappler. So I kind of wonder if he's that kind of nightmare guy on the ground, like everyone kind of says he is. And I tend to kind of think that way too. But I wonder what Cejudo's going to do against that. It's really hard picking against Cejudo. God, like the more we talk about it, the more I'm thinking about switching. But no, I'm sticking with Aljo, I think.
What I hope is if Cejudo wins this fight, personally, I'm leaning towards it. I hope we get Cejudo versus Merab. Firstly, because I think that could be a fantastic fight. Because Merab he's sort of become, you mentioned the boogeyman earlier in the show. He's become Bantamweight's boogeyman. Just this cardio wrestler who just does not stop. But also as well, I just have this awful fear that what's to stop Cejudo from doing what GSP did after the Bisping fight? Just saying, I've come back, I've proven how great I am, look at me, Triple C, C4, whatever he wants to call him. And then just says, yeah, I'm off now, again.
I have here in my notes, whoever wins vacates the title.
Because you think Aljo would move up to featherweight?
I think he's going to featherweight for that Volk fight.
There's no way the UFC are going to give Aljo Volk.
Yeah, it'd be after Yair, I think. But I think he wants to go up to featherweight. He said he wants to go to featherweight and beat up Volkanovski. And I like Aljamain Sterling. I think the idea of that is hilarious, though. So I think it's a bad idea. But he does say he wants to do it, so sure.
So on the whole, your opinions of UFC 288. I tell you what, we were a little bit... I mean, we were positive about this card, but I mean, we've managed to get nearly 2 hours out of talking about this card.
Good. Doing pretty good, you know. Most of it was talking about Jaws, weirdly enough. But
and you talked about Grasso.
Oh man, can we talk about her? Got time for it? No, I'm just
Wait till
kidding.
Fight Night Mexico.
Yeah, fair enough. I have my girlfriend on the back of my phone or on my phone home screen now. It's getting warmer. I probably shouldn't talk about Grasso.
Yeah, has she got this proper mean face?
She's uh she's just mean in general. She's stronger than me. No, I love her to death. She's the greatest thing that happened to me. But she is stronger than me, and I think if I had to, I think she'd give me a good run for my money. And she doesn't. She wouldn't fight fair. I can't do that.
We've got one more thing to talk about though before we wrap things up. You sort of touched on it earlier on the show. A pay-per-view fight week means a new retro review on the main channel. Now this one does have a connection to our main event because both people were on this card. Joe, what are you giving your critical analysis to?
I get to sit and I've already shot it. I should say I got to sit and break down UFC 238. Uh, Henry Cejudo, he's double C, and he's taking on Marlon Moraes, and that card is fantastic.
One of the
And
most underrated cards of recent years.
yeah, I know what I scored it. I'm not gonna say it because then I spoil the whole card for you. But I know what I scored it, and I still kind of go, did I underscore it? Like and I scored it very high. It's such a good card. And if you enjoyed me making fun of Henry Cejudo's head size, I have a lot of jokes on there about Henry Cejudo's head size. I would say 90% of the video, or 90% of me talking about Henry Cejudo in that video is me talking about his 80-pound head. At one point he ducks a high kick, and I say he somehow got his 4-foot tall head low enough to duck it. it's one of my favorite ones. He's the only one. He's the only fighter to rest his head on a king size mattress for a pillow. He's got a big head, and I only say that out of love because I genuinely, like I said, UFC 240 is a card I hold near and dear to my heart. I'm a Mexican American fighter, as I often praise and love on my non-Yair Rodriguez Mexican fighters, and every fighter in the co-main and main event are of Mexican heritage. Even Justin Gaethje, weirdly enough, right? Um, but yeah, and I'm also part of the Big Head Club, so I gotta give Henry Cejudo some crap. But yeah, UFC 238, it's a crazy card.
Yeah.
And we have a new member. You want to talk about that?
Yes, we do. Yes, we've been happy to get a new member of the team. I mentioned before on a couple of the community posts that the workload was starting to really get to me. I sort of brought it up before. I've actually had people saying you're doing a little bit too much trying to get videos out every week. So we managed to get ourselves a second editor to the team. So hopefully we're going to be able to put out more content a little bit more frequently. It's going to do wonders for my mental health because I'm not going to be killing myself on a Sunday evening trying to splice all the videos together. And it also means that the retro reviews can come out every month. So hopefully if you keep your Patreon requests coming in, if there's a card that you really desperately want us to cover, then you can do so at patreon.com/it's not cage fighting. Otherwise, each of our cards are going to have some kind of loose connection to the corresponding pay-per-view. I am happy to say, though, that next month's retro review will be a Patreon request. We can't give too much about that way. I'll just put it this way. Tune into the UFC 289 preview show, and we'll give it away which card we are actually covering. See what I did there, Joe?
Slick. I really like that.
So this is all the time that we have on 288. My name's been Karl Bainbridge. That's been Joe Neal. We're going to be back for the UFC 289 show, where the UFC say welcome back and F you to Canada all in one go. This has been Karl Bainbridge. That's been Joe Neal. Thank you very much for joining us.